As with many key global governance multilateral platforms, Africa, despite its 1.3 billion people and resources on which developed and emerging economies depend for their economic growth, has no seat at the G20, except the membership of South Africa. The continent has thus largely remained the receiver rather than the shaper of decisions made at this global and major but unrepresentative forum of decision-making.
Giving a voice to the global South is the way forward. That is why I firmly believe that the African Union be given full membership of G20.
With the AU now poised to have a seat at the G20, the global body is said to gain enormous legitimacy and representativeness. The AU's membership received support from the major powers in the G20. One of the strongest proposals supporting its membership comes from India, through Prime Minister Narendra Modi's letter to his G20 counterparts. This is Amani Africa Dispatch, our video cast on current political governance and peace and security affairs of continental and multilateral policy importance. The G20 is a forum consisting of 19 of the most advanced and key economies, plus economically the largest regional organization, the European Union. The forum represents 85% of the world's GDP, shaping global economic and political cooperation. Initially, an informal platform to discuss international economic cooperation, it has evolved into a significant platform for global governance, focusing on mobilizing policy responses to economic stability and global challenges. By the nature of its composition, it's a body that gives the major powers and economies of the world heavy sway in global decision-making. At the same time, as a body deciding on major global economic and social issues, its role is not without consequences on the United Nations as the most representative global forum for addressing global challenges. For Africa, which has the largest regional membership in the UN, the reduction of the UN's role, with the G20 becoming the major forum of decision-making on some of the most consequential global issues, is not anything short of detrimental for its agency and representation in global affairs.
Dans le même esprit, je rappelle notre demande d'octroi d'un siège à l'Union africaine.
Without a voice at the table, Africa remains a passive receiver rather than an active contributor to discussions shaping its economic destiny. This has led to decisions that are not responsive to the needs of the countries of the region. Key initiatives such as the G20's Common Framework for Debt Treatment have fallen short due to the lack of African representation in policy and decision-making, rendering them inefficient, slow, and ambiguous. Africa's exclusion from the table also tilts the scales towards creditor nations, disproportionately affecting low-income countries within Africa. These experiences are emblematic of how Africa's exclusion is limiting the G20's ability to formulate fully responsive policies, even on matters of direct concern for Africa, thus limiting its capacity to devise inclusive solutions that benefit the entire global community. The AU's active participation would ensure such frameworks are fair for all parties, debtors and creditors. For Africa as well, its representation through the AU would provide a platform for it to also put on the agenda matters of concern that require international cooperation. For instance, consider the staggering illicit financial flows from Africa, estimated at $88.6 billion by the UN's 2020 estimates, equivalent to 3.7% of Africa's GDP, encompassing revenues from unlawful activities, tax evasion, corruption, and more. This diversion of resources poses a significant impediment to economic development, hindering the progress towards both the UN's 2030 agenda on Sustainable Development Goals and the African Union's Agenda 2063. Measures that could be adopted on this scourge by the G20 could contribute enormously in mobilizing huge resources that contribute to Africa's development and the global Sustainable Development Goals. Similarly, AU's membership can also help to achieve strategic recognition at a global level on the enormous potential of Africa to contribute to the global challenge of climate change through, among others, playing a leading role in powering the global green transition and for developing cooperation framework for realizing this potential on a win-win basis. The membership of the AU also provides the opportunity to redress the void created by the reduced role of the UN on economic policy making, resulting from the emergence of the G20 as the main locus of international economic and development decision making. It would enable Africa to regain and bring its standing as the largest bloc in the United Nations to bear on the work of the G20, and through that, to also elevate its influence in the international financial system.
We need a fundamental reform of the global financial system so that Africa is represented at the highest level.
For AU's membership in the G20 to harvest the expected dividends, there is a need for the AU to put in place effective structures and processes. Effective participation and influence in the G20 depend on such structures and processes. In terms of representation, the decision of the AU is for the rotating chairperson of the Union to sit on the AU seat of the G20, assisted by the AU Commission chairperson. This essentially reflects the current practice of the AU's participation in the G20 based on invitation. Yet, for this arrangement to work for the benefit of all members of the AU, it is essential that the policy positions that the AU chairperson presents at the G20 are positions negotiated and adopted as common policy positions of the Union. Beyond the representation at the G20 summit level, securing the interest of the continent through AU's membership in the club necessitates that the AU is effectively represented in the meetings of ministers, central bank governors, and the G20 finance track and Sherpa track technical working groups. Both for the participation in these key technical working groups and for helping with the development of the common positions, the AU Commission plays a key role. The AU Department of Economic Development, Trade, Tourism, Industry and Minerals, properly staffed and capacitated, is best placed to play the role of the technical focal point in the AU Commission.
And certainly Africa, when she joins the G20, is going to contribute in ensuring that we build an equitable global order. I thank you for your attention.
For purposes of developing and negotiating common African policy positions, both on matters on the agenda of the G20 and those that Africa wishes to advance as part of its membership in the G20, such as its vision for the reform of the multilateral financial institutions, there is a need for having a dedicated subcommittee of the African Union Permanent Representatives Committee. As we approach the G20 summit to be held on the 9th and 10th of September 2023, in the current multipolar world, the G20 needs Africa just as much, if not more than Africa needs the G20. It is with Africa's full engagement that the G20 can reinvent itself and prevent the risk of the emerging decline of its relevance, particularly in the face of the increasing significance of the BRICS.
We have decided to invite the Argentine Republic, the Arab Republic of Egypt, the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates to become full members of BRICS.
AU's membership is not just about representation of Africa. It is about repurposing the G20 to be the vehicle for building a fairer, more prosperous, and sustainable world. This is Amani Africa Dispatch, our videocast on current political governance and peace and security affairs of continental and multilateral policy importance.